Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the October webinar from World Services for the Blind, and we have a very exciting panel discussion ahead of us today. October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So in recognition of that and in celebration of that, we have got a handful of people here today who are going to talk to you about their experiences being blind and visually impaired individuals who are currently in the workforce and have been for quite some time. And they're going to get to tell you a little bit about their personal experiences and getting into the workforce and how they manage with accommodations and working in a world that is largely sighted. So we're really excited to have with us today Molly Hernandez. She is not only a disabled person who is employed, but she actually works Disability Rights Arkansas and is going to be explaining to us some of the services that they offer and things that they can do to help you in your journey for employment. We're also joined by Gustavo Manzanales and Brian Upshaw, both of whom have relationships with WSV, and Brian was even an employee here in one of his former jobs. So we're really excited to have them with us today, and we're going to get started. I will let them kind of introduce themselves in a little more detail, but if you don't mind, as you go through, just kind of tell us what it is that you do and what it entails and how long you've been doing it. Molly, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I'll go ahead. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Again, my name's Molly Hernandez. I am an advocate with Disability Rights Arkansas. I always joke that in my previous life, and I refer to that as before I lost my vision, I was an elementary school teacher, but my vision loss, I have retinitis pigmentosa, so I have a degenerative condition. While my vision deteriorated, I taught, and then when it got to the point that I thought I couldn't teach, I just quit. I didn't know about vocational rehabilitation or services that could have kept me employed until after I stopped working. And I did work with the Division of Services for the Blind with vocational rehabilitation. I got a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling, and I've always been kind of interested in the law and policies, and I found an opening at Disability Rights Arkansas and applied for it, and fortunately got the job. And I do advocacy work in the area of employment. So we have a couple of grants that focus on employment. We are federally funded. One is the Client Assistance Program, and that grant allows us to assist people who are either applicants of or consumers of vocational rehabilitation. If they're having issues navigating that process or receiving denials for service, we can provide advocacy services, and that can involve education, information and referral, legal advocacy, or even legal representation. I also do protection and advocacy of beneficiaries of Social Security. So if you receive Social Security disability and are encountering barriers to employment, and this can be a wide variety of barriers, I can assist you under that grant as well. So I've been there going on 5 years now. So I love what I do, and that's who I am and what I do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Molly. Brian?
Hey, my name is Brian Upshaw. As Heather said a minute ago, I actually was an employee at World Services, specifically the primary IT administrator and also the IT specialist instructor there for a while. So, kind of goes that my career path is mostly surrounding IT, technology, programming, automation, things of that nature. So these days, I actually work with the state of Arkansas as a cybersecurity specialist. So a lot of what our day, my day job entails and our team's day job entails is, basically kind of helping to monitor the computer systems of the state of Arkansas's computer network, making sure things are secure, implementing best practices, kind of keeping a watchful eye to make sure that all of the citizens of Arkansas have access to the public services they need, that they have, that their data that they've entrusted to the state is secure and kept private, and that we are, kind of advancing all these different services that are needed.
Yeah, Brian actually helps us out with some of our security training for employees on campus sometimes, and including sending us emails designed to see if we actually fall for the trick or not. So thanks for that, Brian.
Only once or twice.
Yeah. Gustavo?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Gustavo Manzanales, and just to kind of go with the format that Molly was saying, I'm visually impaired. I'm totally blind. My blindness comes from retina detachment, and I've been working at the Division of Service for the Blind for the last 10 years. And but my job is mainly to do I supervise the assistive technology. I just recently got promoted to another job that will do the business and the vending program and the technology. So that's going to be a nice change for me. Right now in the technology is really just to follow the rehab procedures on recommendation, training, and evaluation, and kind of oversee the training on an individual basis. My job is especially because I get to connect technology to the people that actually need the technology, the software and hardware. Sometimes I have to go out to assess a situation or maybe a job setting and kind of apply some of the technology to help that individual either perform that job or depending on the situation. But it's always fun to be able to do different things. And I'm pretty sure I'll get to talk a little bit more about what it really entitles. So I'll start with the next questions.
Gustavo. So yeah, next I was just going to see if you could all tell us a little bit about how you went about getting into your jobs, including, how did you find out about it? What did you have to do to actually apply, and give us a little history of how you got to where you are. So I'll circle back around to Molly and we'll just go through each of you again.
Okay. It was while I was still what you would consider in training. I was getting my master's degree, and this will just kind of sound anticlimactic. I was scrolling through Facebook and saw a post with disability rights, or from disability rights, searching for an advocate. And of course, advocate seems like the most general term in the world. And I really wasn't even sure what the position entailed, but I thought, I've liked their other posts. I was not aware of Disability Rights Arkansas other than following them on Facebook. I thought it was probably just a nice attorney or two that had tried to do something to help the disability community. I had no idea it was part of a national network and that there were so many people employed there. But anyhow, I sent in my resume. I quickly worked on developing my resume, sent it in, and was called back for an interview. The interview itself was actually not for the position in which I landed, and this is kind of something I always share with people with disabilities. As soon as I got into the interview, it was actually for a position, because our agency also does abuse and neglect monitoring. So it was for a position that would go into facilities and monitor for abuse and neglect. And I just did not feel like that was a good fit for me. And that's okay to go into a job interview and realize it's not a good fit. So I promptly told them, you know what, guys, I don't think this would work for me, but let me tell you what I'm good at while we're at it. So, I told them about my history in education, my lived experience with disability, and then my current education with rehabilitation counseling. And they called me back for a second interview and hired me for a completely different position, which is the one I'm in now, that does revolve around employment. So sometimes you're going to get into an interview, and it's okay to sell who you are, even if you're not feeling like you're a fit for what they're offering at the moment.
That's some really good advice, Molly. Thank you. Brian.
Yeah, so there's kind of this pretty common, I guess, saying would be the correct term, that most of your some of the best jobs you'll get and some of the best opportunities you'll find are through your professional network. And I'd say that's definitely where basically my major employment opportunities have come from, is just primarily through just knowing people in the right places, you kind of making good impressions, kind of keeping those connections alive. And then once their organization has a need, like, oh, who we can call. So for example, when I went and worked at World Services, I'd actually, about 6 months prior to getting a job there, I'd come through as a client to kind of sharpen some of my skills and brush up on a few things and kind of, get quote unquote employment ready, which is kind of, what World Services is known for. So I finished my program, went home, and was continuing to kind of work on, sharpening up and, applying for some jobs here and there. But, being in rural Mississippi, there wasn't a lot really in the way of, high tech jobs, So, and then, once World Services needed an IT administrator, that was based on the short list of people to call. I interviewed, got the job, and landed there. For my current position, again, kind of follows the same story. It was just through my professional network where, people that I'd interacted with before, they had let me know like, hey, we have an opening over here. And at the time I felt like I had made a good impression with World Services. The environment, the organization was a lot better off than when I started. So I felt good about making that step and, basically leaving behind positive changes. I've done well here. I've done good for the organization. I think it's time for me to do something good for me, and, moved on and worked with the state. And so that interview process, kind of talking about interviews, was much more rigorous. It was probably a 2-hour interview, followed by a full background check and everything. So basically, from the time that I applied to the time that I actually started was probably 2.5 months to clear all the paperwork and everything. But I've been there for over 3 years now, so I'd say it's been a very productive move, and something that I've considered to be good for my career.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on that. It does seem like you're doing well, and we're very proud of you, Brian.
Thank
And
you.
Gustavo, also congratulations on your promotion, but tell us a little bit about your history getting there into DSB.
Yeah, actually, I want to start like from the very beginning, where, as I noticed, since I know Brian and Molly, I know their stories, and Molly just kind of hinted a little bit on her prior experience as a teacher. Before she lost sight. But my story is more of, I've been blind since I was 10, 11. So I grew up as a blind employee. And one of my first situations that I always kind of go back to is my first jobs, how I got there, the network that I was in at that time, and how I got to this point now. The one of my first jobs that I noticed I received was, maybe the big reason why I wanted this first job was, obviously I did not have the education. I just needed a job quickly. And I started working at the Lighthouse as a 18-year-old and going to school at the same time. And it was, I know a lot of people say, hey, going to work and going to school at the same time is really hard. Either somebody might actually just do one or the other. I know I wanted to make money while I was going to school. I wanted the whole experience. So I started at the Lighthouse, and I was going to school in the evenings from 3:30. Sometimes class would end at 9, and I did that for a few years. At the Lighthouse, I knew that I could continue my education while I was working there. I looked for another job like a year later after I started the Lighthouse, but kept my job, kept that employment going. I also actually worked at World Services right after the Lighthouse. During my first year after I started the Lighthouse, I was thinking to myself, like, where do I see myself in after I graduate school? I knew I wanted to be in this field, in the visual field. So I reached out to World Services, another CEO at that time, and I told her my situation. It's like, hey, I'm going to school for this. Is there any positions open that will let me learn as I am going into school, finishing my degree? And I was like, I was young. I was like, hey, anything you have, I just need to be in that environment so I can learn. She actually had something for me to do as a instructor, and that helped me a lot. I stayed there for about 7 years. And then later on, World Service had some changes. I had found out about this position at the Division of Service for the Blind in one of the technology positions. I applied, and I received the. I luckily was able to get that position. I think also my reputation goes a long ways, where somebody in the network knows that you're a good worker, you know your stuff, and you have the experience. I think that also helped me. The person that hired me, I think, knew my skills personally and professionally. So I think I was a pretty easy pick in that aspect. And I think as I started, I just been, I have a mentality that, you know, you should never just stay in that same position. So I started at DSB. My supervisor left, and I knew I was probably the next one in line. So that's always a good mindset to have in mind. Where you're gonna go next, how you're gonna progress as you move into, you know, into an employment setting. And again, this happened just recently. My supervisor left again, so then I went ahead and applied for that position. So I think that's always viewing your job as a avenue to promotions. And I think going back to what I just said too is the doing your job well in any step that you're in, any step ladder that you find yourself in.
Thanks, Gustavo. I think I kind of hear a common thread running through everything that each of you said, in that you really had to get out there and kind of use your network, use your connections, and, you know, put yourself out there to get into the positions that you're in today. Would you have any tips or advice for others who are trying to get into the workforce, whether it's getting back into the workforce after losing sight or maybe joining the workforce for the first time? But is there any advice or tips you would like to share?
Sure. I noticed that that most people will get maybe the job they want if they already have a job. Maybe the current job they have right now is not what they want, but when you go into an interview showing that you already have a job, sometimes that helps a lot. That has happened to me most of the time, and when I see somebody else, I always kind of suggest like, hey, just get a job. Once you're in that job, you can move around. Once the people around you see your skills, see your motivation, it's easier to move around in that situation. It doesn't matter what it is, just get in the door.
I think that's some really solid advice right there. Getting your foot in the door, that's a big step that can possibly take you a long way. What about you, Brian?
You know, I could sit here and talk for 2 hours ad nauseum about this subject because I think there's a lot to it. But one point I think is worth making pretty clear is that, you know, it is important to have a degree of self-confidence and kind of a can-do attitude when you approach these, whether it's an online application, whether it's your resume, whether it's an interview or your first day on the job. You know, when I work with people, whether they're disabled or not, you know, obviously there's such a thing as false confidence, but usually somebody, when they know what they're doing and they're good at what they do, they tend to speak a little bit more energetically about it. They tend to not be as timid or as shy. And so sometimes, as someone who's even sat in and performed interviews, those are some things that I pick up on. You know, obviously everybody gets a little bit nervous during an interview. And of course, what some people might not realize is, you know, the job of the interview is not only to ask you questions, but also to get you comfortable enough to where you feel like answering those questions honestly and openly, and kind of get rid of some of those nerves. But even if you walk in and you're not sure of yourself, you're not sure if you can do the job, if you're not sure, well, I don't know if I can do this. This isn't, you know, people can pick up on that. And so obviously I don't want anyone to hear that and say, oh, I just need to walk into these interviews and just act like I know everything and just, you know, put on this false sense of bravado that I can't substantiate. But, you know, whatever you're doing, whether it's through your professional networks or writing your resume or interviews, you know, have faith in yourself. You know, have faith in your abilities and what you can do, and know where your strengths are and lean on those heavily, because at the end of the day, yes, your interviewer probably will, in the back of their mind, have some questions, especially if you're the first blind person they've ever met or interacted with. But if you can let your strengths shine forward and show that this is something I'm good at, and I know I'm good at it, and I can demonstrate that to you because I'm able to talk about this freely and openly, and I'm excited about it and passionate about it, and I've got hey, let's get stuff done attitude. I think that really does disarm a lot of maybe some subconscious prejudices or biases that somebody might have. And so I think that's probably just an overall point is know why you're there and act like you're the person for the job, because they're not going to give the job to the best candidate. They're going to give the job to the best candidate that's available. You don't have to outshine every single person in the world. You just have to outshine the ones that they've interviewed.
That's a really good point, Brian. And I mean, especially if you're dealing with challenges associated with somebody thinking that your disability is going to make you less than, walking in there with some confidence in yourself is going to definitely go a long way in helping the potential employer feel a lot more confident about you.
Precisely.
So I think that is excellent advice. Molly, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, Gustavo and Brian are spot on with their responses. But I will say, just from my professional perspective, if you're a person with a disability and you're either looking at trying to go to work for the first time, or maybe stay in the job you're in, that maybe your disability has changed and you're worried you're no longer going to be able to work, or you want to advance in employment, you want to move up and do something different, and you feel like you're underemployed and you can improve, work with vocational rehabilitation. And when I say that, it's a collaborative effort. So you can't just open a case with DSB or ARS, Arkansas Rehabilitation Services. You can't just open a case and expect them to do all the work and magically you're going to find a job. I mean, you're going to have to put in the effort and work with them, let them know what you want to do, what you're hoping to achieve. And then when it comes time to the fact that you're ready for job placement, work with them, let them know your deficits, that, what, I don't know if I'm a strong resume writer. Is there someone who can assist me with this? I'm not sure if I'm great with interview skills. Is there someone who can coach me on that? There are so many services that you can explore with vocational rehabilitation that can assist you in these skills, because some people are very natural and outgoing, and they're going to go into an interview and command the room, and that's a gift, but it's also a skill you can develop. So work with the resources that are available to you as a person with a disability, and it's really going to improve your prospects on being able to work.
Hey, Molly, I have to say something to that. That's a great point that you just made me think about. I don't think any of three, you and Brian and myself, I don't think we got help getting our jobs as far as that goes. It was from, I'm assuming that we all got the jobs from our personal strive to get that job, because I have since we deal with clients and we deal with other people and we are in the community to know other blind individuals, I notice there is a trend too that hey, I have a rehab counselor, they haven't got me a job, I don't know what to do. But I think that is the point that you made, as far as like, hey, you do have to do 90% of the job and then find the resources that will kind of enhance your skills.
Absolutely. That's something I hear too, even, within our own community, that, well, they're not doing anything for me. And the way to make it happen is get in there and get involved and work with them and get the wheels moving.
Yeah, because who has the most interest about you getting a job is yourself,
Mm-hmm.
I think I always say that too.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, and I think each individual knows better than anybody, what they're capable of, what they would enjoy, what's going to be something that is not only, employment, but enjoyable for them as well. So you've got to get out there and put yourself out there in order to get to where you want to be.
And I know in my own personal vocational rehabilitation case, when I actually saw the ad where I wanted to apply for a job, if you had looked at my case itself from the point of view of a counselor, I was still in graduate school. I wasn't quote unquote ready to work and ready to move on to what they call job placement. But I knew myself well enough to know I can do both things at the same time. Same as Gustavo. He wanted to work and go to school at the same time. So I took the initiative and started applying and moving that forward in that area on my own accord.
That's great. So we touched on this a little bit, but my next question that I wanted to ask was, in the process of getting where you currently are professionally, did you ever face any challenges with regard to your visual impairment? And if so, how were you able to overcome those?
You want me to go first?
Sure, go ahead, Molly.
I mean, I think the biggest challenge that we all encounter, I mean, aside from public perception, is transportation. I mean, maybe I'm over speaking, but transportation is a huge issue. We live in a rural state. I actually don't live in Little Rock, but our office is in Little Rock. And at the time that I applied for my job, one of the big, I guess, advantages was my husband has an office in Little Rock, and I saw that the address was very close to where he works. So that took out the transportation component for me. But I think that if you guys may echo that as well. Of course, Gustavo, I know you live in Little Rock, but transportation is a huge barrier, and it's one that takes a lot of creativity to get around when you're a non-driver.
Yeah, that's a main reason I stay in Little Rock myself. That was one of the biggest decisions that I will not get out of Little Rock. For that specific reason, I always say this: I'll get on anything that has wheels, So I ride the city bus, I do Uber, Lyft, France, Lynx. If you have a scooter and if it would drive itself, I would get on it. But kind of to go on your question, I think one of the biggest barriers that I kind of been seeing, especially working for the state and all this, is the accessibility of websites, the forms. Everything is still obviously in the works on making everything accessible. I think I would assume that Wally and Brian they have the same problems.
Yeah, I would say accessibility of tools is definitely a part of that. And I would also like to, give a +1 to Molly's point about transportation as well, because I'm a non-driver. My wife is also a non-driver, so kind of in the same situation as Gustavo. If it's got wheels and I don't have to drive it, then I'm there. I would say one that hasn't been mentioned yet is probably dealing with coworkers and managers and some of those perceptions of, well, maybe not perceptions of, but uncertainty around your capabilities as someone with a disability. And that's not just unique to blindness. That can apply to anything. So it's your first day on the job, and your manager, says, "Hey, can you do this?" And they have no idea what to expect from you, from what you're able to produce and what you're able to do and complete in what timeline. And same thing kind of goes for your coworkers. For my field, with dealing with a lot of security sensitive things, there has to be a lot of trust among our team in terms of knowing that if I ask so and so over here to take care of a task, that they have the technical expertise and the judgment to be able to handle that effectively. And so when you're someone with a disability, there may be a kind of an extra little hump you have to get over in terms of demonstrating your expertise and demonstrating that, if I'm assigned a task, or if I'm responsible for completing something, that, you can count on me. And that dependability, I think, does kind of help mitigate or whittle down some of the initial concerns that people might have over their, lack of knowledge as to, okay, I've never worked with a blind person before. I have no idea what to expect. So, I think kind of the natural tendency is to expect a little less. And, depending on your situation, you might choose to, you know what, no, I'm gonna, try my best to, really shine above the rest and put my best foot forward. And again, kind of like what Molly said earlier is, some people I think can step into a room and, be a bit more outgoing, shake hands and, kind of her term, command the room. But if you're not a naturally outspoken person, I think you can still achieve a lot of that trust by just demonstrating competency, demonstrating that you're somebody who's you can be worked with, you're able to do the job, you're able to kind of, work with the team, have those conversations, have those, relationships. And over time, I think a lot of those barriers will kind of erode. Because my biggest challenge in employment, I would say, has not necessarily been any technical or process based constraints. It's oftentimes been the human element. And, you know, thankfully, I think a lot of times when I've started a new position, I've had a good track record of kind of establishing rapport pretty early on, to where when I do end up needing to go to my manager and say, hey, I'm trying to perform this function. There are some accessibility barriers in my way. I think there are some options we can explore. What are your thoughts? Let's sit down and do those. I have not once so far had a situation where I did not get an audience with the people I needed to get an audience with, and that something was not, adjusted or changed. So I think absolutely kind of, bumping shoulders with people and establishing that rapport is going to be a big benefit to kind of getting what you need in the workplace. But there is naturally I think a bit extra difficulty when you have a disability and kind of establishing that credibility amongst your peers and to your manager.
And if I can jump in to that note, when you're talking about, kind of having to step up a little bit for public perception, and sometimes this is the elephant in the room, but I think this is probably a good, safe place to discuss it. We're in a sighted world, and how you present yourself matters. And, dressing professionally, making sure, that you are put together, it does go a long way. Is it completely fair? No, but it is how the world is. So if you need help, finding outfits, things like that, I mean, those are things you can even discuss with your VR counselor about, hey, I need a good interviewing outfit. It makes a difference. I'm a woman, and we hate to be judged on our appearance, but I've gone so far as to make sure that my makeup is tattooed on. I know I'm not going to do a great job of that myself. So I keep a standing appointment with a hairstylist. It's just, it is what it is. And sometimes it's not addressed enough, but taking care of your appearance and doing your best, it could make the difference when you're going into interview, and just, professional peer relationships.
Agree completely.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly right, Molly. And that's something that, is expected during the interview process. And if you as a visually impaired individual are wanting to join, a sighted workplace, the expectations for you are the same as they would be for anybody else. So, going in there kind of owning your disability and saying it doesn't matter, look at me, I'm the same as everybody else. Like, I think that can go a long way towards establishing your confidence and your potential employer's confidence with you. And something else to keep in mind too, if you're dealing with a situation where, you think you have a potential employer, he's a little reticent to consider hiring you, is that most job accommodations are not as complicated and expensive as a lot of people would assume. In fact, the Job Access Network reports that currently most job accommodations that actually require expense to the employer cost less than $500. So I think if people are going out there being forthcoming about their situation and what they need to do the job, then kind of getting all of that out in the open and cleared up on the front end can also help you out a lot. So we are coming down to the end of our time here, but Molly, just to follow up with something you said earlier when you were introducing yourself, that Disability Rights Arkansas obviously is an Arkansas agency, but you mentioned a national network. So are there similar services like that in other states available for people?
Yes, and not to go back too far in history, but in the 1970s, Geraldo Rivera did an expose of an institution in New York called Willowbrook. It's something, if you ever want to Google, you can see. And he uncovered some horrible treatment of people with disabilities. And because of that, Congress passed a law that every state and U.S. territory would now have a protection and advocacy unit. so it will be designated by their governor. And so starting in the 70s, every state plus the US territories do have protection and advocacy, or P&A organizations. So that's what Disability Rights Arkansas is. We're part of the National Disability Rights Network. So in total, there are 57 P&As. And yes, there's one in every state. We're federally funded under a number of grants. You know, I work in employment. We have abuse and neglect. We have education attorneys. So we have a lot of different priorities, and they're established by public input survey, and then our board approves them every year. So feel free to go to our website, disabilityrightsarkansas.org, and or I think it's disabilityrightsar.org. You'll find us, Google us, and you can find out more about us and the different work that we do.
Thank you so much. That's a resource that might be very helpful for listeners all over the country, not just those here in Arkansas. So I appreciate that information. And thank you all so much for your contributions to this discussion today. I feel like we could probably keep talking for another 3 hours and not run out of things to talk about. But in light of the fact that everybody has other things to do today, Lee, do we have any questions in the chat or any raised hands that want to ask some questions?
We don't, but if anyone does have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat right now. And I also just added a link to disabilityrightsarkansas.org. Yeah, but I don't see any raised hands if anyone has any questions.
Okay. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us today. If you need training or you're looking to join the workforce and gain employment, like I said earlier, whether it's because you've lost your vision later on in life, or maybe you've been blind for many, many years, but you're trying to get into the workforce now, feel free to check out wsblind.org. That's our webpage. You can learn about our training programs there, and you'll also find our phone number. You can also send questions to training@wsblind.org if you have any other questions that aren't answered on the website, and we would be happy to assist you in your journey to employment. But again, thank you, Molly, Brian, and Gustavo. This has been absolutely excellent, and congratulations to all three of you on your success and dedication here. So it's a month to celebrate everybody. But thank you again, everybody, and we'll look forward to having you join us on the next WSB webinar.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.